Welcome to In the Weeds with experienced attorney Elisa Stewart.
Hello and welcome to In the Weeds with Elisa Stewart. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're going to talk about the complexities of cannabis licensing amidst lawsuits in New York. Elisa, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so you're California-based, but we're going to talk New York now.
Well, I have clients in New York. I'm a New York licensed attorney there as well. I sort of started my career out on the East Coast.
Okay.
And
I didn't know that.
California. Yeah, I'm licensed in Colorado, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts, a little bit everywhere. So,
Oh, wow. Okay.
yeah,
Well, you
New
take
York is one of the states I have clients in. I really enjoy this state. It's fun.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm excited to talk about this. It's New York's cannabis market has faced a lot of lawsuits since the legalization of adult use cannabis. From your perspective, how have these legal battles affected the development and growth of the market, especially in its early stages?
It has really hindered the growth. And New York is unique in that they really tried to create, do it right. They wanted to have cultivation open up first. And they took all these people who had done hemp and had a really hard time in the hemp market, and they said, hey, we're going to transition into cannabis. Get growing on your cannabis. So they started growing cannabis. And then once they rolled out their dispensary ordinance or laws, really, these lawsuits started. And what happened was it really slowed down the progress of issuing dispensary licenses. And because it did that, it also compromised all those poor farmers who were hanging on by a thread already for having done hemp. So it was sort of a perfect storm. And I do want to say that the lawsuits, some of them were very interesting and posed very extraordinary questions. And as an example, one group pursued, basically they raised the question of whether or not a state could discriminate against out-of-state residents in its business. And of course, they cannot, right? But this particular constitutional provision isn't explored very often. And being explored in the context of cannabis, when it still remains a Schedule I substance, made it a very interesting lawsuit from most lawyers' perspectives. But really what happened, the way that New York dealt with that issue, was they said, we understand that you want to raise this dormant commerce clause issue, but how about we just give you a license? We'll just give you a license and you go away, right? And that's what they did. They gave that one person a license and said, let's make this go away, because what that person had done when they brought their lawsuit was they got an injunction. And the injunction stopped the state from issuing dispensary licenses, right, where they had cannabis farmers in crisis and all of this stuff. So New York was like, we'll give you a license, just go away. And so that's how that got resolved. And the legal question wasn't ever resolved, really. New York settled. But that really delayed the process and the rollout for these dispensary licenses. And so there was no place to sell product that had been grown already. And, that has been sort of the story of New York as it's moved forward. There was a lot of promises that have not come out in the way that I think New York anticipated they would. And that's just sort of the story of cannabis these days anyway. But New York is almost, the perfect storm of cannabis terribleness.
The Office of Cannabis Management, the OCM, has been under intense scrutiny as it works to issue licenses. What legal hurdles is the OCM facing with that current litigation, and how are they responding to these challenges?
And I'm sure that OCM doesn't want to hear this, but to some degree, these are self-inflicted. And you cannot, I know that they wanted to benefit New Yorkers, but you cannot, and everybody who works in government knows this, you cannot discriminate against out-of-state businesses, right? You just can't. It's not lawful. So a lot of these were self-inflicted, these issues. And then they created new self-inflicted issues when they removed the buffer zones. So you're supposed to have 1,000 square feet between dispensaries in New York. And New York had tried to issue licenses to people who had properties first, and then second to people who didn't have properties. But what that did was that created a problem for some people with properties, got their license issued, and then the people who were 2 blocks away from them couldn't get theirs. So their licenses went provisional and they had no place to go. And so New York decided, we're going to remove these buffer zones and we're just going to let people be wherever they are. And that created another lawsuit for them. So, I mean, they tried to hurry things and they shot themselves in the foot. They tried to plan it all out and they shot themselves in the foot. So it's just, I think it's a cautionary tale about how governments can, help with businesses, but maybe they shouldn't create the industry, right? Like, and that's what I think New York was trying to do, was create the framework for how this business would work within the markets. And you really can't. You can't do it. I mean, I think that's what New York has learned. I think they're a cautionary tale to other jurisdictions who are trying to do it with less regulations and less rigid requirements for what they're requiring of licensees.
How long has it been legal in New York, recreational?
Oh, it's a good question. I'm trying to think now. I applied for licenses, at least we were able to apply for adult use licenses approximately, I got some issued 2 years ago.
2 years?
So
Okay.
we're coming up on the second year of least applying for adult use. So they've had like earlier efforts at trying to get people to be in cultivation or do this, that, and the other. But there's people who have been licensed now they're coming up on their 2 years and they're renewing their license. So there's been stores open for at least that long.
Okay. Okay. And has it gotten better or worse?
I think it's getting better. It's
Okay.
slowly
So it's on the
getting
right
better.
track.
It's on the right track. I think that there's still many hurdles, but it is definitely improving.
When it comes to the social equity emphasis that New York's cannabis legislation is putting on, lawsuits have raised concerns about the fairness of the process. How is OCM balancing social equity goals with the legal pressures and lawsuits that are coming out? I mean, I can't imagine trying to do that.
So I commend the various states that have tried to do social equity because I get where they're coming from. There was a war on drugs. It disproportionately affected certain communities more so than others. And it was purposeful, right? It really was purposeful to impact certain communities. So I understand the interest in trying to right that wrong. But in righting the wrong, there is just a resistance in the law, right? And from the courts to have any sort of discrimination at all, right? They want to have like this landscape where discrimination doesn't exist. And that's what the courts are looking for. But on the other hand, you have this real world disproportionate impact that has happened to people. So, but what happened in New York is all these lawsuits, like I'm a veteran and I should have been considered before you considered people who had convictions, right? How come they got considered first? Like all of those types of issues came up, as opposed to like just like letting everybody apply and sort of saying, we have an interest in attracting certain groups of people and we're going to try and provide grants and support to certain groups of people, but maybe not have restrictions about when people could apply. And I think we'll see less and less of that as more states come online. Minnesota, I think, recently, tried to roll back sort of their social equity stuff as well for these same issues that they were attracting lawsuits. And so you want to try and make it possible for everybody to be able to be successful in a business, but significantly, for people who have been harmed by the very product that's now, can be available to people.
Yeah.
But you can provide doorways to people to that business without saying, hey, you get to go first. You can provide grants, you can provide support, you can provide training. You don't have to close doors because somebody has a criminal record. There are other ways to do it than I think to provide very significant preferences that are supported by timelines where another group gets out ahead and gets a foothold in a market as opposed to having an open market, which is, I think most people would agree that free markets operate better than overly regulated markets. And so because of that, we kind of sort of have to provide different supports that may not impact on the market itself.
Yeah, and obviously the DEI stuff is a very big talking point right now, and there's people on one side that are fired up about it, saying, so I get why those lawsuits, people are like, hey, that's not fair. Why should they get chosen before me?
Right.
Heart was in the right place. It doesn't always go the way people plan when you try to do these sorts of, I don't want to say like righting wrongs, but trying to think about that social equity piece.
Yeah, I agree. I really would love to see more people participating in the cannabis industry just because it is new. And I think more people have more brains at the table are always a better thing. But I think it has to be done in a way that doesn't exclude anyone, really.
So there's been recent court rulings, like ones halting certain dispensary licenses that have caused significant delays. How do you see these rulings impacting both the licensed operators and the broader cannabis market in New York?
Everybody who has gotten their license already, they're thrilled every time there's a new injunction, right? Because it means that they are going to be open and they remain open, they continue to operate, and they continue to try and service the needs of the entire state of New York while everybody else is sitting on like on a list somewhere waiting to get in, right? So that's what's happening from that group that's open. They're great, right? If your license was approved, you're in good shape. But if you're on the list, you have had setback after setback after setback. And I think that has been very frustrating for people. New York did a thing where they sort of overpromised and underperformed. They promised a lot in terms of financial support. They said that they were going to have, I think, $150 million or something to that effect in money available to provide people with leasing, to provide build out support, to provide loans. And that never really materialized. It's an interesting thing, you want to encourage people, but I think like setting specific goals, like we're going to raise $150 million and we're going to make that available. Maybe do that quietly if you can, and great if you can, but don't promise it, right?
Yeah.
Because it turns out it never happened, and then everybody was very, very disappointed in that.
Sure. It makes you look bad when you can't deliver on something like that.
Yeah.
Are we likely to see changes or adjustments to the laws that could help mitigate future legal challenges or provide more clarity for businesses, given everything that's gone on in the last few years?
Yeah, I think so, because ultimately, I think New York, like everybody else, just wants to see the industry get open. And I think that they are learning the hard way. I mean, learning is hard, right? It's always painful. But learning that, the more they try to direct which way the market will go and who gets to participate in it, the more they are being, hindered and finding obstacles to get there, as opposed to just sort of creating, supports, like I said, in training or grants or other opportunities, provide different types of support for certain categories of people if they so choose, but not put those in the sort of regulatory framework about who gets a license or who's eligible to get a license. I think that's the problem.
Can they flip that script, you think, at this point? Is it something that is it too late to get to that point that you just spoke about, or do you think they can get there?
Well, I mean, they're sort of already built into their law certain time periods for which, like LA, or it's actually, is it Los Angeles? I think certain social equity districts in California had a certain time period that they would have certain preferred groups of people have licenses before anybody else could have them, right? And I think New York copied that, but then they got sued by everybody, right?
Yeah.
But those time markers are passing, no matter what. So at some point, the market is going to open up to everybody. And that's just going to happen through a feature of time. And if anything, I think New York would have to come to sort of the position that trying to direct where it goes and who gets to participate slowed it down, as opposed to just opening the doors and trying to provide support for groups that have been disproportionately affected.
Yeah, instead of deciding who can play the game, like just help them along the way. Right. To play it well and learn it and be successful. It was almost like an overcorrection, which is, I mean, honestly, it happens all the time in this country and in the world in general, in society, because we try to fix wrongs and then we overcorrect way far, and then it ends up backfiring.
Yeah. And I really appreciate that they wanted to correct that wrong. I think it is true that, there's a whole swath of people who went to prison and jail, and some people still are in prison and jail for a product that now everybody can buy in a store.
Right.
So
yeah. You walk down the street and grab some. Yeah. Aspiring cannabis entrepreneurs are thinking about entering the New York market. What advice would you give them? Would you tell them to wait? Like, would you tell them get the license in or get your application in now? Would you tell them to go pick a different state? Like, what would you advise?
Well, I mean, I would tell them, to consider the expense for them how hard it is going to be able to find even a space to lease, how expensive that can be in New York. And to consider all those expenses, but also don't be limited by a jurisdiction. Consider that there are other states that have far less restrictions and less regulation, that might be more open to their particular business model, and they should explore those other states as well. But I wouldn't say no to New York, because it's still, New York is New York, right? It is.
Yeah.
There's no other place like it. So if you're going to make it there, you will make it anywhere. So
Yeah, that's definitely true. That is definitely true.
yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us on In the Weeds with Elisa Stewart. To connect with Elisa, visit stewartlawpc.com, and please like and subscribe to our channel. We love having you be part of our community we're building here. And Elisa, thanks so much for being here. Always love chatting with you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.